I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring Gang, or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Welcome back to Bloody Angola. I am your host, Jim Chapman, and today I am continuing that 50 Shades of Evil series. This week, I'm taking you to California, where in the summer of 1969, a group of runaways and dropouts walked into two Los Angeles homes and slaughtered everyone inside. Acts so savage they shattered the peace and love dreams of an entire generation. But the man who sent them wasn't holding the knife. He was sitting in a desert ranch, strumming a guitar, quoting the Beatles, and promising his followers a race war that would make him a king. This episode dives deep into the life of Charles Manson, a small-time con man who became one of America's most infamous cult leaders. I'm going to bring you from his chaotic childhood in reform schools and prisons to his brief delusional stint chasing a music career in the 1960s. I'm also going to cover with you how Manson weaponized charisma, drugs, and the counterculture to build what he would call the family. I'll examine the twisted logic of Helter Skelter, the brutal Tate and LaBianca murders, and the circus of a trial that followed. So let's get into it. And for Charles Manson, it all started on November 12th of 1934 in Cincinnati General Hospital, where a 16-year-old girl by the name of Kathleen Maddox gives birth to a baby boy that she hadn't even named yet. There was no proud father in the waiting room, no flowers, just a scared kid holding a newborn she hadn't planned for. That baby was Charles Miles Maddox. He was soon to become Charles Manson. Now, Kathleen was wild. She was restless and already deep into a life of alcohol and bad decisions. She filed a paternity suit against a con man Army colonel named Walker Scott, who skipped town the second he heard that she was pregnant. Kathleen tried to make it work for a minute. She married a laborer named William Manson, and he gave Charles his last name, but that marriage didn't last long. By the time little Charlie was a toddler, his mother was leaving him with babysitters for days at a time, while she and her brother Luther went on drinking binges. Then, in 1939, when Charlie was just 4.5 years old, it all came crashing down. Kathleen and Luther, they go out, they get drunk, and they decide they're going to rob a service station in West Virginia. They beat the attendant with a bottle, they steal what they could, and they got caught almost immediately. Kathleen was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in state prison. So imagine that little boy. He's barely old enough to understand. He's watching his mother get handcuffed and taken away. No goodbye hug, no promise she'd be back soon. Instead, Charlie was shipped off to live with his aunt Glenna and his uncle Bill Thomas in a tiny river town in West Virginia called McMeechin. And it was a strict religious household. There were no hugs, no I love you. His Uncle Billy ran what you would call a tight ship. Some family stories say he once punished Charlie by making the boy wear a dress to school just to humiliate him into behaving. Now, Charlie later told interviewers his aunt and uncle made it crystal clear affection was a sin. Quote, no hugs in this house, he remembered them saying. He also slept in the attic and he claimed that he felt invisible. So for 3 long years, that was Charles Manson's world. Then in 1942, Kathleen, she gets paroled. She comes back for her son. But the reunion wasn't the happy ending you may hope for. Mother and son drifted from one cheap rooming house to another, one shady boyfriend to the next, and Kathleen, she drank heavily. She chased men. She chased trouble, and Charlie tagged along like unwanted luggage through all of this. Now, by the time he was 9, Charlie was already skipping school. He was stealing from local stores. He was learning the hard way that the world didn't care if he showed up or not. He once claimed in a later interview I watched that he even set his school on fire just to feel something, a desperate cry for attention that nobody answered. Biographers who would dig later into court records and family interviews, they paint the same picture I'm telling you now. A boy that was starved for love, learning the only way to get power was to take it. And here's the part that's really hard to hear, but important to understand. This wasn't just a tough childhood. This was like the perfect storm of abandonment, emotional neglect, and instability. Psychologists who studied Manson's early years, they pointed out something. It's simple, but it's pretty profound. When a child learns that the people who are supposed to protect him can't be trusted, something breaks inside. He starts believing that the world owes him. He starts looking for ways to control others so he'll never feel powerless again. Charlie, as a matter of fact, craved family so badly that he would later build one, albeit a twisted and dangerous one, out of lost young people who were just as broken as he was. The seeds of that desperate anger, they were planted right here in those cold rooms in McMeechin, in those endless moves with a mother who kept choosing, it seemed like, everything else over Charlie. So by the age of 12, Charlie was already running away. He was already getting picked up by police for petty theft. And his mother, she tried, it seemed like, kind of half-heartedly to find him a foster home. But instead, the state stepped in. At 13, he was declared a ward of the court. He was sent to what's known as the Gilbert School for Boys. This is in Indiana, but that's where the boys' story kind of collides with the teenagers. And we'll get to that in a moment. But right now, I just want you to sit with this image. A small boy standing in a window in McMeechin, West Virginia, watching his mother just disappear into a police car, knowing deep down that nobody was ever really coming back for him. Now, that boy didn't become a monster overnight, but every rejection, every cold night in that attic, every time he was told that he wasn't worth loving, those moments stacked up like kindling, and the fire was just waiting for a match. By the age of 13, that neglected boy had already been labeled a delinquent. The system was about to get its first real look at Charlie Manson, and it would fail him completely. So let's go to 1948, and I'm going to take you to Indianapolis, Indiana. And a skinny, scruffy 14-year-old Charles Maddox, still using his mother's surname at that time, he was caught breaking into a grocery store with 2 older boys. It was petty theft. It was nothing violent, but it was enough to send him straight to the Gilbert School for Boys, a strict Catholic reformatory run by the Franciscan brothers just outside of Terre Haute, Indiana. Now, this is the late 1940s, and you can probably picture this place. Gray stone buildings, endless rows of iron beds, and dormitories that smelled like floor wax and sweat. Morning mass every single day, whether you wanted to go or not. The brothers believed in discipline. They believed in hard work, prayer, silence, and the strap when the words failed. And Charlie, he arrived with a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. He was small for his age, but his eyes already carried the hard glint, if you will, of someone who had learned early that trust was a luxury that he could not afford. He hated everything about it, the structure, the confinement, everything. Within weeks, he ran. First escape, he slipped out of a window at night. He hitchhiked toward his mother's last known address, only to be picked up by police 2 days later and dragged back in handcuffs. So the brothers, they doubled down. They give him extra chores, longer prayers, more isolation. And guess what? Charlie ran again and again. 3 escapes, as a matter of fact, in under a year. Each time, the freedom only lasted a few hours or days before he was caught and shuttered back. Now, by 1949, the state had had enough of his escapes. They shipped him to the Indiana Boys School in Plainfield, which is a much harsher juvenile facility known among the boys as Plainfield Hell. And this was no reform school with prayers and chores. This was concrete walls, barbed wire, and guards who didn't mind using their fists. Manson was later described in interviews with a mix of rage and dark pride. He claimed that he was beaten regularly. He claimed he was sexually assaulted by other boys while guards would look the other way. Whether every detail was exact or exaggerated, which Manson tended to do in detail, one thing was undeniable from court records and fellow inmate accounts. The environment itself was brutal, and it taught Charlie something far more dangerous than any lesson plan could ever produce in school. He learned to survive by becoming the smartest guy in the room. He started manipulating the staff, playing the remorseful kid one day, the tough guy the next. He would form little alliances with other runaways and outcasts, and this would create tiny families, if you will, inside of those walls where he could feel control. He discovered that he could read people, their fears, their weaknesses, their need to feel important. He could bend them to his will. Prison psychologists at that time noted his well above average intelligence and his growing skill at conning adults. One report called him, quote, a boy with a gift for manipulation. Now, he still ran whenever he could. It didn't mean that he loved prison. And in 1951, at 16, he and another boy, they escaped for good this time. Or so they thought. They stole a car, they drove across state lines, they robbed a grocery store at gunpoint. This is in Illinois. And the issue with going across state lines was that they would become federal fugitives and offenders at this point, which means the FBI is going to get involved. So Charlie gets caught again along with his accomplice, and this time he is sent to the National Training School for Boys. This is in Washington, D.C. And that was a federal reformatory that was supposed to be the last stop before adult prison. If he didn't get right here, he was going to big jail, as they call it. But for a brief moment, it looked like the system might actually reach Charlie. He took vocational classes in tailoring and auto mechanics. He even earned some praise for good behavior. But underneath, that same fire burned. And in 1952, he was caught raping another inmate, another boy, by knife point. That incident landed him in solitary and destroyed any chance of an early release. Psychologists who examined him would write chillingly accurate notes. Quote, this boy is emotionally unstable. He has a tendency to form intense relationship with others in order to dominate them. unquote. He was released in 1954, and at this point he's 17, but also by this point a pattern was already locked in Charlie's mind. He drifted back to Indianapolis and he married a 17-year-old waitress named Rosalie Jean Willis. That was in 1955, and for a short time, he tried the straight and narrow life. They had a son, Charles Manson Jr., who was born in 1956, and Charlie worked at a service station. But the temptation of easy money was stronger than his desire to walk the straight and narrow. And eventually, he would take Rosalie and the baby on a cross-country crime spree. They would steal cars, they would rob gas stations, all at gunpoint. So he gets arrested again. This time, the judge shows absolutely no mercy. At 19 years old, Charlie Manson enters the federal penitentiary system for real, the big jail. First stop, Terminal Island in California, then McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary in Washington State. So over the next 13 years, he would spend nearly every single day behind bars. And by the time he walked out in 1967, he had been incarcerated for almost 17 straight years, starting at the age of 13. Most of his adult life up to that point had been behind bars. Now, inside of Big Jail, Manson, he didn't waste time. He devoured books on self-improvement, and he would absolutely study, to the max. He was almost an expert at Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Like, it was his Bible. He took Scientology courses from a fellow inmate who had been a former auditor, and he would learn techniques of auditing and mind control that he would later twist into kind of his own unique style. He practiced hypnotic speaking patterns in front of the mirror, and he would use the same soft, rhythmic cadence that would one day hold young runaways at the edge of his every word. He would even learn how to become a master con man in prison. He would run gambling rackets in the yard. He formed tight little crews of followers who looked up to him as a big brother, as a protector, as a leader. Even though in stature, he was a little bitty guy. He was like 5'3" and 120 pounds soaking wet. But he would use his mind to manipulate even other convicts. Now, that same dynamic that he had started in juvenile hall, he was reforming that in adult prison. He hated authority with a passion, and it really bordered on an obsession. Guards to Charles Manson were pigs, rules were chains, but he learned to smile at the right moments, to say the right words during parole hearings, and of course, only violate every condition the moment he was set free. Now, there were two more marriages during brief periods out on parole for Charles Manson. One to a woman named Leona, with whom he had another son, but that pattern, of course, never changed. Short bursts of freedom followed by new crimes, car theft, armed robbery, interstate transport of stolen vehicles, and each return to prison would only sharpen his skills. Each parole denial would free the resentment that had grown in him since the day his mother was taken away in handcuffs. It seemed at this point the system played perfectly into his hands. Every time society tried to fix Charles Manson, it actually gave him a better education in manipulation. The reform schools, they would teach him how to read people. The prisons taught him how to control people. The isolation would teach him patience, and the constant rejection taught him that the only person he could ever truly rely on in his mind was himself. He believed anyone could be bent to his will. Now, by 1967, at 32 years old, he had spent more times in institution than on the streets. Imagine that. You've been in jail longer in your life than you've been free, and he's 32 years old. Now, when the gates of Terminal Island finally opened up for the last time in March of that year, he walks out of those prison gates. They would clang shut behind Manson for the final time, and he steps into the California sunlight wearing the same cheap clothes the state gave every parolee upon parole: a thin jacket, worn jeans, and $35 cash. He had no home. He had no job. He had no family waiting for him, but he did have a plan. So he hitchhikes north to San Francisco and straight into what's known as the Haight-Ashbury district. And at this time in history, the streets, they were alive in this area with color. Flower children in tie-dye, barefoot girls handing out flowers to everybody. The smell of marijuana, thick in the air. It was a place where runaways and dreamers came looking for peace and love, and for meaning, and for family. Charlie Manson saw this as opportunity for him. So he started small. His first follower was Mary Bruner, a shy 23-year-old librarian from Wisconsin who had just arrived in the city. And within weeks, he had gathered kind of a small circle of followers. 19-year-old Lynette Squeaky Fromm. Charlie would give his followers nicknames, Squeaky being one of the most, infamous of those followers. But she was a freckled redhead running from an abusive home. 19-year-old Patricia Krenwinkel, who called herself Katie, and Susan Atkins, who was a troubled 19-year-old who had already danced on the edge of the law. Wasn't long before more joined. Leslie Van Houten, a pretty 19-year-old high school dropout. 23-year-old Charles Tex Watson, a clean-cut Texas boy who had come out west chasing the hippie dream, and dozens of others who drifted in and out of the ever-growing group they began calling the family. Charlie would give them what they were looking for. He played guitar, and he sang soft folk songs that he had written in prison. And he passed around LSD like communion wafers, guided their acid trips with his prison-honed voice. Slow, rhythmic, and mesmerizing. He preached a twisted gospel that mixed Scientology, Dale Carnegie charm, and his own dark philosophy. The world was ending soon, right? We were in a race war, he would tell them. He called it Helter Skelter, named after the Beatles' White Album song. Black people would rise up and slaughter the whites, he would say. And then Charlie and his family would emerge from the desert to rule what remained. He told them they were chosen. They were the ones. He told them he was both Jesus and the devil. And the scary thing is, these kids believed him. By late 1968, Charles Manson's family had swelled to nearly 50 core members. They moved out of the Haight and into an old, crumbling movie ranch in Santa Susana Mountains, north of Los Angeles, and it was called Span Ranch. The owner, 80-year-old George Span, was nearly blind and half in love with the girls, who would call him Grandpa. In exchange for chores and companionship, he would let all of them live on that property rent-free. Now, life at the ranch was pretty wild. Drugs, sex, rock and roll, everything you would imagine, just absolute obedience on top of that to Charlie Manson. Charlie ruled with what you would call a velvet fist. He would demand total devotion. Followers would surrender their identities, their possessions, even their names, and he would give them nicknames, as I told you. They listened for hours as he ranted about the coming apocalypse. He would quote lyrics from the Beatles' White Album as if they were scripture. Quote, "Helter Skelter is coming down," he would say, his eyes burning with evil. "We have to be ready. Be prepared." So the family would start stealing cars. They would start forging credit cards and stockpiling weapons to, quote, "be prepared." And then the small crimes would start to escalate. So the first murder came on July 25th of 1969. A guy by the name of Gary Hinman, a music teacher and an occasional drug dealer who had once been friendly with the family, he was targeted because Charlie believed he had money and a car that they needed. Bobby Beausoleil, Susan Atkins, and Mary Bruner went to Hinman's Topanga Canyon home, and when Hinman refused to hand over what they wanted, the violence started. He was beaten, stabbed, and held for 2 days while they ransacked the house. Now, before he died, Susan Atkins dips her finger in his blood, and she writes "political piggy" on the wall. And that was kind of a premonition for more to come. And Charlie, it's important to note, he was not there that night, but he had given the order, and to his followers, Charlie's word, that was the law. And then came the nights that would shatter the entire United States. Let's go to August 8th of 1969. It's a warm Friday night in the Hollywood Hills, and I'm going to take you to a secluded estate rented by mega film director at that time named Roman Polanski. Now, Roman Polanski, he had a wife who was 8.5 months pregnant, who was famous in her own right. Absolutely beautiful, stunning lady by the name of Sharon Tate. She was an actress, and she was hosting friends at this rented estate while Roman was away filming in Europe. And the guests were all rich people. They were glamorous, successful, full of life, celebrity hairstylists. Jay Sebring was there. Coffee heiress Abigail Folger, as in Folger's Coffee, was there, y'all. A Polish writer by the name of Wojciech Frykowski, and an 18-year-old Stephen Parent who had simply stopped by to visit the caretaker of the estate. That was the only reason he was there. Around midnight, a black 1965 Ford pulls up in the driveway. Tex Watkins, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian climb out. Linda was ordered to stay by the gate as a lookout, and the other three, armed with knives and a .22 caliber revolver, they creep toward the house. And what happened inside is the stuff you would see in a horror flick. They cut the phone lines, they forced their way in, and Tex announces, quote, "I am the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." And over the next 20 minutes, the slaughter that occurred inside that home was merciless. Stephen Parent was shot 4 times in his car as he tried to leave. Jay Sebring was shot and stabbed while trying to protect Sharon Tate. Wojciech Frykowski fought desperately, running outside only to be chased down and stabbed 51 times. Abigail Folger was stabbed 28 times as she ran toward the pool. And Sharon Tate, beautiful, vibrant, begging for her life and that of her unborn baby, was stabbed 16 times while she pleaded, quote, "Please don't kill me. I don't want to die." When it was all over, the killers used the victim's blood to scrawl the word pig on the front door and Helter Skelter on the living room wall. And it was spelled HealterSkelter. It was deliberately misspelled and meant to point toward a coming race war. The very next day, August 9th, the nightmare repeated. This time, the target was a wealthy couple in a wealthy neighborhood. Leno LaBianca, the owner of a supermarket chain, and his wife, Rosemary. Again, Tex Watson led the attack, this time accompanied by Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins. The couple was tied up. They were stabbed repeatedly. Leno 26 times. Rosemary 41 times. And man, she fought valiantly for her life. A carving fork was left protruding from Leno's stomach. And on the walls, they wrote "Death to Pigs." In another area, they wrote "Rise." And once again, Helter Skelter. Now, once again, Charlie himself did not physically participate in either night's killings. He drove the killers to the Tate house, he gave the orders, and he left. He was at the ranch when the LaBiancas were murdered. Yet every drop of blood was shed at his command. He had turned ordinary young people, many of them bright, attractive, from good homes, into instruments of pure evil. There would be one more victim tied directly to the family's collapse. On August 28th of 1969, ranch hand Donald Shorty Shea, who had grown suspicious of the group's activities, he was lured into the hills and brutally murdered, stabbed, beaten, and decapitated. His body would not be found for months. So the bodies at both the Tate and LaBianca's homes, they were discovered, and the nation was in shock. Now, the man who pulled seemingly everyone's string is going to finally face justice in the most bizarre trial America had seen. And how did he get caught? Well, one of his followers had went to a bar, meets another female who she didn't know, but she would tell this female, "I feel like you're someone I can trust," and asked her if she had heard of the Sharon Tate's murder. And the lady says, yes. And this follower says, "Well, do you know who killed her?" And the lady says, "No." And the follower says, "You're looking at her." And this lady, she left and she called police. And she said, "I think I know who killed Sharon Tate." So that's how they would catch this family. They learn that they're at a ranch. They go to the ranch, and there they find kind of the remnants of the family. Ragged, sunburned, still chanting Manson's name. And they find Manson in a cabinet hiding. They handcuff him, and he is brought to jail. In the investigation, it moved fast. Vincent Bugliosi, a sharp, relentless LA prosecutor with a background in high-stakes cases, he was assigned to lead the prosecution. And he would quickly connect these dots. He would figure out the bloody messages at both crime scenes, the family's obsession with the Beatles' White Album, the stolen vehicles that they would end up with, and the chilling loyalty of all these young followers, what that meant. He figured out it all led back to Charles Manson. But the biggest break really came with Linda Kasabian, the 22-year-old lookout from the Tate murders. See, she had fled the family, and they granted her, meaning the state, granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony. And she became the prosecution's star witness. Wide-eyed, soft-spoken young lady who would sit on the stand and describe in calm detail the nights of the murder. So the trials of Charlie Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, they would start on June 15th of 1970 in LA County's Superior Court. And it would become the longest and most expensive trial in California history up to that point. 9.5 months of pure spectacle. The courtroom was packed every single day. Reporters from around the world would jam the press benches. Cameras weren't allowed inside during this time, but the media circus would spill onto the courtroom steps every morning. And from the very first day, Manson would turn the proceedings into his personal stage. He would arrive every morning and he would be freshly shaved, hair neatly combed. He'd be wearing the same denim shirt and jeans, but his eyes would burn with defiance. On the third day of jury selection, he stands up, he grabs a pencil from the defense table, and he carves a deep X into his own forehead while the judge is sitting there looking at him, stunned in silence, and he says, "I X'd myself from your world." And he announces this in a soft, almost hypnotic voice. The three female defendants in the courtroom, they immediately do the same thing. Now, later, the X would be turned into a swastika on Charlie Manson's head, a symbol that he claimed represented the broken cross of a dying society. But we all know what that really represented. The girls, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten, they behaved like a synchronized choir of the damned. They would laugh at inappropriate moments. They would blow kisses to Manson from across the courtroom, and once even stood up together and began chanting in unison when he was scolded by the judge. When the prosecution tried to introduce evidence, they would erupt in outbursts saying, "You're all pigs. Helter Skelter is coming down." And Manson himself was repeatedly removed from that courtroom for disruptions, only to return with fresh theatrics. At one point, he lunged toward the judge and he shouted, "In the name of Christian justice, someone should cut your head off." He was a circus act all in himself. Now, Bugliosi, the prosecutor, his strategy, it was brilliant and pretty methodical. He didn't just prove the murders, he proved the conspiracy, which was important in getting a conviction from Manson. He painted a portrait of Manson as a puppet master who never needed to hold the knife himself. Remember, Manson himself had not killed anyone. So over 140 witnesses, they take the stand. Linda Kasabian's testimony lasted 18 days, just her testimony. She described voice trembling but steady how Tex Watson had said, "I'm the devil," before those killings began, and how Sharon Tate had begged for her baby's life, as I told you earlier, and how the killers had returned to the ranch covered in blood and been greeted by Manson with open arms. Now, the defense, well, it was almost non-existent, to be honest. Manson's lawyers tried to argue diminished responsibility on Manson's part. They also tried to argue that drugs influenced all this, but the family's own behavior destroyed any sympathy a jury or the general public, for that matter, would have had. When the jury finally deliberated, it only took them 10 hours to reach guilty verdicts on all counts. 7 counts of first-degree murder for Manson and the 3 women, plus 1 count of conspiracy. And on March 29th, 1971, the same jury recommended the death penalty for all 4. California would have other plans. In 1972, the state Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional. All those death sentences were automatically commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole. So for the next 46 years, Charles Manson became America's most famous inmate. He was housed primarily at California State Prison, which was a maximum security facility in Central Valley, and he racked up 14 parole hearings between 1978 and 2012. And each one of these was a media event. Manson would shuffle in. He'd be wearing prison blues, right? Long hair, his beard getting wilder and wilder as time went on. He would still have that swastika tattoo, but it was faded, still visible, however. And he would go on rants for hours about the environmental collapse, race wars, how the system had created him and not the other way around. As a matter of fact, in 1981, he told a parole board, quote, "I'm not a prisoner in prison. I'm a prisoner in your mind." And in 1992, he would grin and he would say, quote, "You people have been looking at me for 40 years, and I'm still right here." It was so important to him to feel like he was winning. Of course, this never stopped him from trying to manipulate. He would smuggle out letters from prison. He would give the most bizarre interviews, and he even recorded music that fans still circulate online from his prison cell. Prison officials, they would move him between high security units because he continued to attract followers, and guards and visitors, even sometimes celebrities, would write him fan mail. He became like a dark celebrity. His face would be on t-shirts and album covers, and his name would be invoked anytime people were talking about evil. Now, the victims' families, they fought every parole attempt. Sharon Tate's mother, Doris Tate, she became a tireless advocate until her death in 1992. She attended every hearing. She stared straight into Manson's eyes during these hearings. Other families, the LaBiancas, the Folgers, the Sebrings, they spoke of the lifelong void that was left in their life due to these murders. Their pain never faded, even as Manson's legend grew, if you will. But by the mid-2010s, Manson's health collapsed. He was human, after all. Diabetes, heart problems, and gastrointestinal cancer, they would take their toll. And on November 19th of 2017, at the age of 83, I couldn't believe he lived that long, Charles Manson died of natural causes in a hospital wing at Courtroom State Prison. His body was cremated with his ashes scattered in a secret location that nobody knows. Some say it's in the mountains that he once called home, so that no one could ever turn his grave into a shrine. The boy no one wanted had become the man the world could never forget. Prison had not broken him, and actually it had only amplified his myth. The system that failed the child had spent decades guarding the monster he would become. Now, what I told you just now is the real story of Charles Manson, not the cartoon villain on t-shirts, not the rock star or the urban legend, just a human being whose every shade of evil was grown from the same dark soil: neglect, rage, and an almost supernatural talent for turning other people's pain into his power. The 50 Shades of Charles Manson weren't the murders alone. They were the manipulation that made ordinary kids into killers. The charisma that can make a room full of lost souls believe the apocalypse was coming and that only he could save them. Society's blind spots that let a career criminal walk out of prison in 1967 with nothing but a guitar and a smile and find an entire generation ready to follow him. And look at what he left behind. The Tate-LaBianca murders didn't just end 7 lives. They ended something bigger. The last innocent gasp of the whole 1960s and 1970s dream. Peace and love, right? Parents locked their doors. The counterculture that had welcomed runaways now looked at every barefoot stranger with suspicion. Cult awareness became a national conversation. Laws changed because of this. And to this day, when we hear the word Manson, we don't think of a neglected child in West Virginia. We think of monsters hiding in plain sight. Think about it. Yet even in the darkness, there are some lessons that are worth carrying to the light. Recognize the signs of manipulation before they become a movement. Listen when someone demands total loyalty and offers total belonging in return. Pay attention when charisma feels too perfect, too soothing, too exactly what you've been missing. Because the next Charles Manson, he's not going to arrive with a swastika on his forehead. He'll arrive with a podcast or a social media feed or a self-help seminar or a family that feels like home. To the victims' families, those who still carry the empty chairs at holiday tables, I want to say that my heart's thoughts, prayers, all of that are with you because these people will suffer forever. So here we are at the end of yet another episode of 50 Shades of Evil. And it's important to remember this series, y'all, is not about glorifying monsters. It's about understanding how monsters are made so that we can spot the next one before the bodies pile up. Now, if this episode moved you, shook you, made you look twice at people around you, do me a favor and share it on your social media. It really helps me grow, and it's very important to this podcast. Also, check out the Patreon for commercial-free early releases and more at patreon.com/Bloody Angola podcast. And until next time, for Bloody Angola, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary.